What up, y'all? My name is Anthony. I'm a polyglot who's taught myself 5 languages. I speak 7 in total, but Spanish I don't count as being self-taught because I learned a lot of it in school. And I was just thinking about this the other day, and it's very interesting to me the way in which my different languages have evolved, and how even without certain bits of practice, I still feel very confident to use these languages. Right. So the first one I learned is Spanish. Right. I've lived in Mexico for 5 years, and I lived in Spain for a year. Spanish, I feel like I speak basically as fluently as English, right? And so one of the things I thought at the beginning of last year is that in English, I'm a pretty eloquent person. I can speak pretty well, right? And so was my goal for 2025 was to go from just I feel confident basically saying whatever I want to I want to be able to speak better, right? And with that in mind, I read 100 Years of Solitude in Spanish. I read Borges in Spanish, right? Favorite Spanish language authors. I just read one of Isabel Allende's books, right, to start off the year. Because that was the whole purpose, was to improve my vocabulary, be able to speak more correctly, more eloquently, right? And obviously because I studied it in school, it's a little bit more of an academic language for me, right? The same I would say with my French, right? My French is definitely much more book smart than it is street smart. If you drop me in Paris, specifically if you drop me in the ghetto, I would probably struggle to have a conversation, being 100% honest with you. But I also read Journey to the Center of the Earth in French and had really no big issues with that one. My French is definitely much more of a academic language, I would say, in the sense that I feel much more comfortable reading or writing in French than I do speaking it. And I think that's probably a little bit of trauma from having gone to, where was I? Toulouse. And me trying to speak French and the guy just looking at me like I was a complete idiot. I'm like, cool, this is sick. And my understanding is that's just French people. I've had conversations with other people who speak French from Belgium or from Switzerland and from parts of Africa, right? And able to have conversations and enjoy my time. Although that didn't work out as well in Morocco. I accidentally got that's a long story, but there's a funny story about me in Morocco trying to speak French that doesn't work out so well. But I think that trauma is probably why I don't feel as confident speaking the language. Versus if you look at Portuguese, which I feel comfortable reading because it's very, very similar to Spanish in a lot of ways. But that's definitely a language that I feel much more comfortable talking, right? Because my biggest experience with Portuguese, my whole experience with Portuguese was reading a book in Portuguese while I was in Spain, and basically being like, this is the same stuff. Looking at a grammar textbook for like a month, and then going to Brazil. Going to Brazil and speaking and learning how to use the actual language is my biggest experience with Portuguese. And so I feel way more comfortable with it and using it in conversation in the day to day than I would necessarily like trying to read a philosophy textbook in Portuguese. Right. Now, again, given the fact that it's Portuguese and Spanish are so similar, I probably wouldn't struggle that much to read it. I definitely do rely a lot on Spanish when it comes to Portuguese and speaking, but it's a language I feel much more comfortable using. Right. Now, now the language I feel probably the most comfortable in right now after those three is probably Arabic because I've spent 2 years studying it. Arabic is interesting. I haven't had really any real life use of it thus far, other than speaking with teachers. Right, it's been more like try to read and things like that and study it. It's very different language, which is interesting. But I feel pretty comfortable to say most everyday things. Right, I definitely feel like I'm at that comfortable intermediate level where like yes, I'm lacking a lot of vocabulary, but I have the structures to be able to talk about just about anything, and I have the skills to be able to figure out the words I need. So if you drop me in Egypt or Jordan or wherever, I would be okay, right? Even though I'm missing a lot of words, even words for like basic things like knife or fork, I probably think about it, but it would take me a second, right? But I have the language skills to get around that, right? Now, where I find it interesting is the difference between German and Italian, right? So German, even though don't, I haven't studied it in a long time, I know I'm missing lots of vocabulary. A lot of those basic words to have that basic beginner traveler conversation, I feel super comfortable with because it's very similar to English in a lot of ways, and the vocab is very similar to English in a lot of ways, right? Yes, I'm gonna probably mess up royally the idea of case, right, and maybe the word order, and maybe some of those longer compound verbs I might mess up, but I'm gonna be able to have a conversation, right? Versus Italian, on the other hand, Italian is a language I've learned just through books, and I used it for a week in Italy. But I would definitely feel because there's so much overlap with the vocabulary at a higher level. And this applies to French, this applies to Portuguese. And as long as those changes on the endings, right, a lot of those words tend to be the same, right? So I would probably feel more comfortable talking about history or philosophy or architecture or things like that using the Spanish words and basically just Italianizing them than I would talking about what I did today, right? Because a lot of the basic verbs and basic words I don't know. I haven't studied in so long, right? But if you gave me Dante's Inferno to read, I could probably make my way through that book without much problem because a lot of that vocab is going to be very high level, right? And I can rely on Spanish and the rest of the Romance languages I know to be able to work my way through it. Any other? So that's the different order I would put it in. Is like Spanish, basically as fluent as English. French, feel very confident to read and write, not as confident to speak. Portuguese is the opposite. I feel much more confident to speak than I do with French. Arabic, German, and then Italian.